Hi, Chris. My name is Johan from the core team of Y University. So today I just wanted to ask you a few questions about how it was like going from poly, I believe you're in TP, to NYU currently. So maybe for starters, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, what you're majoring in, and where you used to be studying in before this?
Sure. Johan, thanks for having me here. So a quick introduction about myself. Yeah, I'm Christopher, or just Chris for short. I'm currently in New York University in New York. I'm a sophomore here, about to finish my sophomore year, majoring in global studies. And originally in Singapore, I was at Temasek Poly. I did a diploma in aviation management. So I graduated from that, went to NS, and now I'm here in NYU.
I'm just curious as to how your application process to the US was like, how you got started thinking about uni in the first place, which schools do you apply to, and why ultimately choosing to come to NYU.
Mhm. So I kind of got started, well, like most poly students, towards my last year. That's kind of when I started to think about uni, because that's close to when the local uni application phases are. Um, but when I started to look at the local unis, where most of us look at it in our usually our second to last or last semester in poly, by then it would have been too late to apply for U.S. colleges. Um, but a really good friend of mine, because of NS, I had the extra opportunity to apply. Us guys, we get up to like two more times to apply. A really good friend of mine, and this is after finishing getting into NUS, NTU, or whichever. A really good friend of mine convinced me, with the time that I had, I should try to apply to a US college as well on top of that, because she felt that it would be a really good fit for me, the kind of stuff that I was looking for out of an education system. And because of that, with the time that I did have, I started to research US, well, the UK as well, international education a
Mm.
bit more, kind of starting the February of that year. And then it looked like a really good option for several reasons. Then I went to NS, I went to BMT, and while I was there, I finished up my application. I applied to NYU was the first school I applied to. I applied early decision one, which is the binding phase where if you get in, you have to confirm and you have to rescind all your other applications. So that's what I did. I got into NYU in about November of that year. And then the next year I went to school. I rescinded all my other offers, the local ones, and so on. That's the story. To answer the question of why I wanted to study in NYU, or first more broadly, why I wanted to study abroad,
Mm.
um, was because, well, for one, in general, with education, I was looking for a curriculum that would have been broader. Because I went to a diploma with TP, I studied aviation management. After 3 years of that, I found it to be quite narrow, and most diplomas are designed that way, right? Because they're designed for you to take it and immediately work.
Mm.
But I found myself at another crossroad of wanting to explore what my interests were, and the best option would have been a kind of education program that would allow me to explore those broad interests.
Mm.
NUS has a really attractive new program that does that, the College of Arts and Sciences and NUS College, which is where I would have been going to if I went locally. Um, but I was still much more attracted to the broader education system that the American system has, not the UK system. Theirs is like the Singapore one, but the American system, with that, the liberal arts formula, where you spend about a year or two really exploring everything, and then you narrow it down in your last 2 years. That was quite a unique feature to American education. So that fit more with what I was looking for in an education. And on top of that, just the overseas exposure. There are a ton of opportunities now locally to do exchanges, to do years abroad, to do international programs. But still, I wanted that full immersion, and I felt I would have only gotten that if I'd studied abroad, fully committed to the full 4-year program. On top of that, this is just for NYU specifically. Why I decided to do NYU was because it's a very international program. Me doing global studies there.
Mm,
NYU has campuses around the world. It's very easy for us to do a study abroad. So even though, like for example, even though it's a 4-year program, 2 of my years have actually not been in New York City. I was in Florence for my first year, and I'll be
interesting.
going to London for my 3rd year. So that's broadly, yeah, why overseas, why American education system, and why specifically NYU.
Mm. Studied
Aviation.
aviation management in TP, but you applied to global studies in NYU. Am I right?
Yep.
Yeah. So how did you justify that switch of majors?
Um, that switch of majors, I think, was easy to pitch.
Mm,
Because I mean, for one, I was completely okay with an entire pivot. A lot of my poly friends, and it's normal, for when you graduate to pivot to something else. I have friends who studied aviation business and now they're doing biochemical engineering in uni, for example, because we're still young, we're still figuring out what we're interested in and what we're not. So it's very natural part of the way. It never has that feeling of wasted years, sunk costs,
mm,
or so on, because ultimately it's still a part of discovering what you're interested in, right? But for myself, for
mm,
that pivot towards, like, from aviation management to global studies, and also kind of the way I pivoted it
mm,
through my essays, through my story,
mm,
was in my time in aviation management. Besides, like, literally learning the business of it, how Changi
mm,
Airport works, and so on. I also was lucky to have some good overseas study opportunities while I was in Poly with my diploma. And also, when you learn aviation business, you're learning you're learning it quite at a global scale. Um, we also had some classes in TP. We quite literally have a class called Global Studies, and that I
mm,
found really interesting too. So from my time there, I figured, like, because there's so much more interesting stuff I wanted to learn, still loosely related to what I was already studying in TP. I was looking for something broader than that, and the global studies would have been a good pivot, right? Because it was that interest in travel, that interest in understanding how the world works, and putting all the pieces together. So that's how it kind of naturally flowed. That interest naturally evolved, and that evolution was easy to write out through my essays into applying to a US college.
okay. Yeah, I see. What do you think is the biggest difference between applying from poly versus applying from JC?
I think there are two big differences.
Mm,
The most immediate one, and this is more administrative technical, is just the timeline and the qualifications.
mm,
Um, so in a lot of more elite JCs, they already prepare you earlier on, and like they do in American high schools, they prepare you early on for the university
mm,
application, because
yeah.
that's the way it's designed. A lot of my friends in their first year, they're already thinking about Harvard, Cambridge, UCL, NYU, etc. Um, and because of that, there's a clear idea, and the timeline of JC kind of matches it. You have your prelim exam, and the prelim exams is when the time is just nice when you are applying to UK or US unis as well, in addition to the
Yeah.
Singapore one.
Mm,
Um, and also the qualification, the GCA level exam
mm,
is recognized by a lot of US colleges. A
mhm.
polytechnic diploma, because it's so different, is hard to recognize, to make sense in relation to their systems here. So there's that advantage too, and also the SAT prep for some of the schools. Even early on, they encourage you to take your SATs and help you prepare for it. Um, and in poly we just don't have this sort of timeline or runway that's laid out because so many people, so many different students doing different things. You can't have, or it's hard to have a sort of academic talent management program at that
Mm,
scale. So a lot
mm,
of it is so much is based on the autonomy. And frankly, a lot of my friends didn't apply just because it never crossed their mind. They could have perfectly been able to, but it never
right.
crossed their mind. It was never on their timeline, on the table. Um, but the other big difference, and I guess maybe an advantage, I guess, of the poly system compared to JC in terms of how it can prepare you for, I think, uni in general, even in Singapore, but
Mm,
also uni in the US specifically. And that is just by the way a poly's designed. It's that 3 year autonomy. It's university light, right? You
mm,
have your own schedule, you do your own thing. But more than that, you have so much extracurricular at your own volition as well. All the clubs, CCAs, groups, and stuff, JCs have them too. But I
mm,
feel like they're at another level. They're at the tertiary education level. Sorry, in a poly, where you
mm,
can fully explore your own interests. None of it's mandatory. You could do nothing at all, or you could do everything and create your own sort of life story while you're in poly. And this is more ripe for the pickings for what the US application system is looking for, where one of the most important parts of the application is not so much grades. Grades are given, but the ECs, the extracurricular, and the essays. And I feel with the opportunities you get in the 3 years in poly, there's so much you can do to build some of the most incredible extracurricular um, stories or sections for that application, that US application system. Yeah.
mm. Okay, so you mentioned biggest advantage for poly, which is freedom to take part in your own ECs and really build your own story. But there were also some disadvantages like lack of resources or the inability to contextualize your grades to the US college admissions counselor. So, what do you think are some ways that as a poly student I can work around those disadvantages?
Mhm.
Mm,
The first way is to start now and go on Google and read as much as you can. Um, but I guess maybe to put it into steps, right?
mm,
Depending on when you hear this,
mm,
it's where in the timeline are things now. Um,
mm,
you need to lay that timeline out because it's such a long process. So it's May now, for example. The applications, the last people just got in to college about a few weeks ago. People just got admitted, but in around, so now's the time to start like looking at what the options are, which ones are you interested in. Then applications start to open around July, August in the common application system. Then the first round of early decisions by like September, then the second round by October, something like that. Just for the first thing to do is go figure out the timeline and how it relates to what you're doing, because there is a mismatch and you're going to have to figure that out. But once it's all laid out, it becomes that much more easier because you know the time you have, you know what you have to focus on. Then after that is, of course, reading the very long list of stuff you need to do for a US college application, because it's a lot. The timeline's already scary. Then when you open the Common App and you see all the stuff you need to fill,
mm.
it's not like NUS NTU where you sign in by SingPass, submit your GPA, and you're done. That's literally, it takes 5 minutes to apply to NUS. I swear, it's quite impressive. But um, but for like the Common App, it's a lot of stuff you need to fill, and that, like, on the top of my head, it's like all details about yourself, your background, your family, where they studied, where you studied, your grades, your extracurricular, your essays are 2 or 3 or 4 different essays. It really depends. There's so much to fill and to write, and when you understand what is on the form, you understand what they're looking for and how they're asking for it. And that would also affect the kind of colleges you're researching, because you'll realize better which colleges are more for you. Another thing that's really different in how my American friends approach applying to college in the US, it's not simply to go online to QS rankings, top 10, choose those, apply to all those, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Princeton, etc. Because those schools are so different, right? A student in each of them are very different from each other because they're all incredibly different schools. NYU is in a city; it's got city kids. Harvard, Harvard's Harvard. MIT's are more STEM based, and so on. And a lot of people don't know that it's not simply these are the best schools. You just go to them. There are hundreds of universities in the U.S., and a lot of them are incredible. So a big part of that process is just narrowing down which are the ones you want to apply to. And then after that, after you got after you get the timeline, after you understand the forms, then you got to start doing it. You got to start working on your essays. If you're applying to 6 colleges, for example, there's a good chance you're writing at least 15 different essays. It's a lot of writing. So to understand that work that you'll have to put in, how to make the essays unique, then once you have those applications done, which is the longest chunk of time, then you just start paying to apply. It costs like $80 per application too. So like that's why you don't just apply to 20, because it's a lot of money. But that's basically how to do it. And after that, because it's so in depth, then it becomes very specific and unique to different cases, right? You need to find a teacher that could be your recommendation. You need to figure out your CCAs, how to put it all together. But ultimately, there will be a mismatch in timeline. But depending on where you are, if you've graduated already, that works. If you're in your last year, that also works because they understand cumulative GPA. They understand that you've not graduated yet, but your GPA is good and it'll likely be good anyways. That sort of stuff. So those are the two main the hurdles to overcome. Basically, a lot of it is just being independent about it and really sitting down, doing the research, and getting your hands dirty with it.
Right. I suppose for a lot of the listeners out there, they are probably already thinking about applying to US unis, which is why they're watching this. What do you think is a good time to start, all these research? Because I know early decisions, they kind of end in November, right? 1st of November for a lot of unis. So working backwards, what do you think is a good time to start researching, to start asking your teachers for recommendation letters and writing your essays?
I think, and I mean, it's always sooner better than later, but at the same time, we don't want to push it too early where the moment you step foot in poly and immediately you're thinking Harvard, right? Because then that's gonna take out from your experience in poly. I think the optimal time is the beginning of that year. Let's say you're about to do the next application cycle. I graduate from poly the next April. So maybe now is January. I'm about to finish my second year. I think that's a good time to start just broadly thinking about it. Thinking about, because then you've been in poly for about 2 years and you can start thinking back, okay, I've had this 2 years. What did I enjoy? What am I doing? What am I all about? Is this for me? What do I want to do? And then uh, but those watching it probably have already done it. Like, I want to go study abroad. And then that was a good time just to start. Yeah, January is a good time just to start researching it into it. It's also because you would be in the midst of another cycle, so you can see how seniors or on Reddit or whatever, how their applications are going. You kind of just start immersing yourself in the lingo, in the language, in how people apply and what people are talking about. There's a Reddit page I used a lot last time called Reddit. I think it's called Applying to College A to C, A number 2C. You just kind of read that a lot, and you'd see like just to be immersed in the kind of mindset, to see like the kind of students applying that you're dealing
Mm,
with. That really helped a lot. Um, And I think that's also a good time to start uh, exploring, narrow down the list, and then from the list, which are the ones that need essays, break it up. Some schools, very quick application, other schools, 6 essays. Stanford, for example.
Mm,
Then you just got to work on your timeline. But again, sooner better than later. Take your time with it to really reflect and understand. If you're really thinking of over optimizing it, even sooner, where you're planning what kind of CCAs you want to take and what kind of programs you want to do, because there could be the case where it's January and you're about to graduate, you only have a year left, and I don't know, you realize you've not done a single CCA or whatever.
mm,
That's rarely the case, because no matter what you've done or not done, there's always an interesting story to tell, but that could still happen.
mm,
Where you just want to get yourself more, the least you can do is get yourself more involved with school, or more involved with your own interest. That's the biggest
mm,
step that you could possibly take, because this not only benefits your application, it will
mm,
make it a lot more easier, but it just benefits yourself in general, what you want to do, right?
mm. I guess it's worth it to say that there's no like hard formula for you to get into these schools, right? So like I think it would be a wiser choice for you to stick to, your interests, your own hobbies, and then really craft the story around that instead of crafting your hobbies around the US applications.
Yeah, and around a story you're trying to create. A lot of students around, and that's just a fault of the education system in general, but a
Mm,
lot of students around the world, in an attempt to get into higher education, you
mm,
have so many prep programs, so many like ways that, I'm thinking of going to Harvard in 4 years from now. This is my 4-year plan, the
mm,
thing I'm gonna code, the project I'm gonna do, and etc. And you're kind of just in this weird thing, paying a lot of money for it, and you're not really doing your own interests. And then you go there and you realize you hate computer science and you want to be a theater major instead. Um, the same thing even with poly. You don't want to end up in that situation where you're doing things just for the sake of the CCA points.
mm,
So many people fall into that trap because we like points, right, in Singapore. Um, but when you truly benefit so much by pursuing stuff you genuinely enjoy or are at least curious about, because then the
yeah.
takeaway is so much, right? You could people could force you to do like this community service, that CCA, that sport, or whatever. But then if someone asked you what was it like, you wouldn't be able to talk about it. You want to do stuff you're able to talk about and be excited for, because on these applications, that's what it is. It's about being excited about what you've done and what you're looking forward to.
Mm,
And it's really obvious for these people that are reading your applications. They can tell immediately, this student, you know, doesn't want to do any of this. But this other student has a very interesting story. A good analogy my friend gave me that stuck with me ever since is, for the US application system, you're pitching your story, right?
mm,
The grades are given, so you have to have good grades, full stop. If the GPA is not good, that closes a lot of doors anywhere, Singapore included.
mm,
Um, but the story as well, and the analogy she gave me was, if I read your application, could I give you a nickname? Meaning,
that's
a
cool.
way that the people at the desk know, like, this is that aviation business dude from Singapore, and you kind of like, it becomes a story that is stuck, that is known and referred to that way, right? So what's um that unique thing about you, about your story, right? So many people are presidents of clubs, so many people do all sorts of community service, so many people code things. What else, right?
Mm, right, yeah, exactly. Um, about that, what was your story and why do you think NYU ultimately chose you?
um the story I gave was,
Mm,
um nobody can take it, but the story I gave was, I kind of talked a lot about how, so I am like, born and raised in Singapore, but my dad's American. Well, he's a Singapore citizen, but he's white American. My mom's Chinese. So I did talk a lot about that
mm,
cross cultural, that growing up in that cross cultural thing. But a lot of people have that story as well, right? So growing up in Singapore, but then loosely relating it to how growing up in a cross-cultural environment with parents that traveled a lot for work, how that gave me an interest in also travel and exploration.
Mm,
That explained why I was interested in aviation. Um, and from there, that pivot into just broadly global studies.
that
Um,
fits nicely. Mm,
yeah, so that was sort of the story about myself, my education, the evolution of that, the evolution of the ideas and the themes of the world that I wanted to explore. And then the hook was linking it then to, therefore, a program in global studies with NYU would
mm,
be absolutely incredible because I get to go around the world with this program and explore the cultures, the people, and the places of the world and tell those stories as well. Blah, 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 something like that, But the main thing is that real unique aspect that's
mm,
believable, right? Where you're
mm,
really peering into yourself. Why are you interested in something?
mm,
And then how that interest had led to your story thus far, and what it makes you want to do in the future, and how the college in question is the perfect place to help you realize that. Because ultimately, you want to link it back to why that college is the one. Me as a college can help you realize those goals, those dreams. And there will be some colleges that are better for others in doing this, and it shows through the application.
mm. I guess from what I'm seeing, I can really see the fit between right NYU global studies and your own story. And I guess this experience to travel around the world and study at the same time is really unique to NYU, and at the same time it's very unique to yourself also. So yeah, I think what you said earlier is really important. Like for US unis, there's so many great unis out there. Like don't just look at like QS rankings. It's more than QS rankings, right? Like you have different schools that are good at different things, and maybe just try to do a little bit more research and see how which school you think fits your story better, and ultimately you not only have a higher chance of getting in, but you will probably enjoy your time there much more as well.
Absolutely. And like I'd say the factors to consider in looking for a US college, they're a
Mm,
bit broader than Singapore. So for one, of course, the obvious ones is what areas are they better in? There are some colleges better at STEM. There are some better at maybe some has a really good history program, for example.
mm,
Uh, like Cornell is known for their Southeast Asian history program.
mm,
Would you know? But besides that, the kind of college. So Harvard is very different from NYU for one big reason, because Harvard College is a fully like liberal arts program where it's everyone goes to the same big, 4-year thing. Everyone knows each other. You have 2 years of exploration, 2 years of major. Whereas NYU is a massive research institute. I happen to be in the liberal arts section of it, but it's a big research institute where you have like major in computer science, full 4 years in professional studies, for example. So that also makes a difference in the kind of college experience. It's like going to, there are no Singapore examples. I can't give an analogy. Sorry. Then also besides that, the location, right? Comparing Boston University to Notre Dame, Boston University to Boston College, for example. Uh, BU is a city college, right?
mm,
NYU is a city college. Northeastern is a city college. It's very different when you're in a college that's in a city, than when you're in what most colleges in the US are, which are in small towns in, for us in Singapore,
mm,
relatively middle of nowhere, right? So
mm,
that also makes a big difference where your community is the college that you're in. If you're in Yale, it's New Haven. That's it. Nothing else. You're not going anywhere. Whereas if you're in the cities like here in New York or in Boston or in Chicago, for example, that's a very different environment, a very different vibe. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people want that smaller um, kind of college feel. Everybody knows each other. Other people want that big city feel where you can go
Mm,
around, do whatever. The colleges in London are like that too. Then another thing worth noting is another kind of university that another kind of college that they have here. I use those words interchangeably. Another
mm,
kind of college that they have here
right,
in America are what they call LACs,
right. Mm,
liberal arts colleges. So
mm,
this is with the capital L, right?
mm,
Where it's a really kind of specific, really small, like cohort of maybe 500 at the smallest to like
mm,
1,000 tiny colleges where it's really fully explore your education, four
mm,
years of figuring it all out, and you're
right.
fully immersed in this really tight knit community. So some examples are Smith College, Wesleyan, Amherst, for example,
Mm,
and these are very niche kind of education that also might be more attractive to a certain kind of student. So it's
mm,
worth knowing these all these different considerations when looking at applying to colleges. The last consideration is where in the US it is. The US is massive. It is bigger than Europe. Um, so it's so different. The study in California, the Bay Area, where it's warm, is very different from studying in Boston, where half the year it's super cold. The kind of people, the kind of vibe, beaches are not landlocked, in the center. The kind of people, a population that's more liberal, a population that's a bit more conservative, for example. All these factors um, play a part in choosing.
yeah, and I guess that's why research is really like so important, right? The monster of the US higher education, it can be quite intimidating, but at the same time, you get to know like what it's all about. You realize that there's so many opportunities, there's so much resources for you to take. And um, let's go back to one of the disadvantages of applying from poly, which is it's kind of harder for you to contextualize your academics. Do you have any tips for that? Maybe something I can think of is maybe taking a standardized test like SAT or ACT that
Mhm.
might put your academic ability in context. Yeah.
Yeah. This is definitely the hardest. The easiest way to cross this hurdle
Mm,
is do the SATs. Forget about
mm,
it. And do those as early as you can because it's more similar. It's more similar to your O level exam than it is to anything else you learn after that. So if it's still fresh in your mind, your EMath and AMath, actually not even AMath, your EMath, right? Elementary mathematics. Um, just do it ASAP. That makes things that much more simpler. It opens up a lot of colleges. Example, Georgetown, you can only apply through SATs, full stop, no questions.
mm,
Um, a lot of colleges during COVID, and I got lucky, a lot of colleges during COVID removed the standardized testing requirement, meaning no SATs, meaning for international students as well, I could
mm,
apply without SATs. So that worked well. There are still colleges that don't need standardized testing at all and never did. You can also find that out online. Um, but if not thinking about the poly GPA, do SATs, easiest way, settled. But if you're not planning to, then the next hard part is for the colleges that do not need standardized testing, where you are applying with your poly GPA, the big step is contextualizing it. So for the application, they ask for standardized testing grade, then they ask for your grade in okay for the Americans, your grades in high school because they still need to know how you're performing in school. They would know some students like they're not so good at the continuous GPA, but their SATs was like 1600. So this kid actually he's really good at tests. He's not good at the kind of continuous thing, but that helps, right? Or some students, they have the most perfect GPA in school, and it's really tough school, but the SATs are not so good. But then they can look at either or to kind of contextualize, and ultimately this kid's still smart, right? But just in different ways. Um, So they do look at this sort of GPA thing, meaning that's also where they would then look at what your poly GPA is, where you'd see it in the portal, but you go in and you type in each semester, course by course, what you did, what the grade was, and you give a GPA. You give a sort of what your position, your class standing is, and all this information helps contextualize it to show that this is my GPA. It is what we'd consider high in Singapore. This is a good GPA. This is why. My course is hard. People usually get this grade. I was the first or the second, whatever. Even additional steps. With this GPA, I got into XYZ University in Singapore, which are highly competitive and typically need the score to get in. That also helps contextualize it all. Any bit of information counts. That's what you can do by yourself writing into the Common App. In addition to that, you will need a so-called academic advisor to fill in some details in your form as well, right? So this advisor, they also have the power to help contextualize your grades, what it means, your position in school, your behavior. And this is also a harder part for poly because schools are so big, there are so many students. So unless you really have a professor that's dedicated to this, which we didn't at my time when I was in TP, we didn't. So I had to ask a professor that I worked with closely. He happened to be in charge of scholarships for the School of Engineering.
Okay.
And we were really close, and I asked him, and he was so great about it. He was able to help me write it all out in a way that benefited me. A really good recommendation and really good pivoting of the points. He let me work on it together with him to kind of optimize the way that it's to be written out. So that's another hurdle, is to have that advisor and that recommender on your side to help you out with this application.
Right. So on the topic of letters of recommendations, because we've already covered your essays, your ECs, your academics, what I know is that the ratio of students to faculty in poly is a lot higher than JC. So it's kind of like comparatively more difficult to establish like a close relationship with like three teachers, because you need three teachers of three recommendation letters for most unis. I know you had that one teacher that you were very close to, but the other two, how did you like work around that, and what was your way approaching this letter of recommendation?
Um, so I mean, my case was unique just because of the CCAs I did, the programs I got to do, the people and the network I got to get close to. So in total, besides that one advisor, who I've worked with closely for years too, which is why I was able to comfortably ask him. I got three professors to recommend, and it's true that in poly it's harder to get a closer bond to your professors because they teach you for one semester, you never see them again in your life, or maybe one other time. But these were three that I got really close to, and they were all at different parts of my story. One professor he taught a class, but he was also my advisor for my final year project for poly. So I worked closely with him, was on his good side. And my project was pretty international. It related to, we had to work with the Japanese airport to do something. So I liked his recommendation because his one could have shown, firstly, that I'm just doing well in aviation management in general, but also that kind of global mindedness with having worked in an international project. I got him to highlight that as well in what he wrote. The next professor I asked was the professor in charge of the main CCA I was dedicated to, Temasek Poly MC's public speaking. She was the main advisor. I'd worked with her for years to organize concerts, organize events, organize so much. She's seen my journey. She's seen me grow. She was perfect for writing a recommendation. She would have loved to. And she could have talked about the extracurricular interest that I had, all the extra stuff I got to do that I enjoyed. She got to speak again for my story. The last one was very on the nose. Um, he also works in the School of Engineering, and he was a good friend of that advisor guy. He's also in the department in charge of like scholarships for engineering students. He was also my professor in my class in global studies in TP,
Mm,
and I really liked that class. I really liked him. I think he really liked me. And yeah, I just texted him like, it would have been a bonus because usually you just need one or two max. It's like I'll put a third one in. He taught me global studies. I think it'd be a bit on the nose, but why not? Um, and he's a cool guy. I knew he'd write something. He'd probably write something good. And yeah, I got lucky that I was able to find three very very good professors that I knew understood and have seen my growth and would
mm,
be able to effectively help me show that, right?
mm. Right, that's great to hear. Okay, we've talked a lot about the application process, right? So mainly applying from poly. I think my main takeaway would be you should really identify what your sort of competitive advantage is, which in this case is your autonomy in poly, your ability to craft your own story, but at the same time, um, the disadvantages that you kind of have in academics, in resources that you have, I think it's worth it to say that it is still doable to put your grades into context. And at the same time, this resources is really is I would say the resources are out there in poly. You just have to really take ownership and do your research and make use of those resources. I guess it's also worth it to say that you kind of have more because you kind of have less resources in poly, but at the same time you have more ownership over your application process. You can kind of direct uh, the way you would like your, let's say, your teacher to craft your recommendation letter, right? Your counselor to write you a recommendation. So yeah, I think making use of their autonomy and independence is a really important factor to excel in the college applications. So now moving to your time in NYU, how has it been? How is New York City? How is the academic rigor and the quality of education here? Did it live up to your expectations?
100%.
Mm,
I'm loving it here at NYU. I like the academics that I'm doing. I'm doing the classes I've been wanting to take that I've been dreaming of taking, being able to take in Singapore, learning about the world, languages, this broader education, the opportunity to explore. I've had so many different unique classes to explore and just learn things that I otherwise wouldn't have even known I was interested in.
mm,
Um, the students that you're surrounded by so many like-minded people that went through that same application as you. If you thought yourself was interesting, that means everyone else that got admitted are very interesting as well.
I
Everyone
bet.
has their own story, everyone has their own goals, and you're surrounded by a unique energy a unique energy among students that I've never really felt before, and
Mm,
that in itself is infectious, right? Then just being in the city in
mm,
NYU in New York City, um, it's exciting, right? There's always something going on. There's always a Broadway show to watch, a jazz club to head to, a little activity going on in the park, protest or whatever. There's always things to do, to see, and to explore. There's always a community to find in this city, and it's worked for me. It's definitely been the right fit. everything I was hoping for is true and then some. Growing in ways I expected to, and also didn't expect, learning a lot more about myself in unique ways. And that's only my second year, right? There's still two more to go. Still so much more people that I can meet and things that I can do, things that I can explore, and it's exciting, right? It's already surpassed my expectations, and everything now is just a bonus. It was absolutely worth it. Yeah.
That's great to hear. How was the transition from poly to uni? Do you think poly kind of helped that?
It
Because you said,
helps. It
yeah.
helps in the same way that the poly to uni in Singapore transition's not too bad, because you go from, you already understand autonomy, you understand how to manage your own time, you understand group projects. Um, so that helped. But also, I think the bigger help for me was I didn't face too much homesickness coming here, but I was mainly from NS. In NS, I got to face a lot of homesickness, but when I moved here to New York, it was great. I do not miss. Well, I mean, I miss my family, but not
Mm,
so deathly
mm,
about it.
mm.
So that all does help.
That's nice to hear. Seems like you're really, really enjoying your time in NYU.
Yeah,
Do you have any other tips, any last words for those watching out there?
I think no more final tips. The only point to reiterate is, like,
Mm,
it really is truly an exercise about understanding yourself, figuring
mhm,
out what you're all about, what you want to do. It's okay to realize that what you've been doing is not you. There's nothing wasted about that. It's perfectly fine. It's normal. It'll happen when you're 25. It'll happen when you're 30. So just really, like, just truly think about your story, your interests, what you want to do with it, and ultimately that story, once you have it, when you're excited about it, it'll bleed through what you're writing, what you're applying to, the ones you want to choose. Once you're excited about it, the application becomes so easy, because you want to do it. You get excited to do
mm.
all these steps and
Right,
to
yeah,
write my ECs out, right? It's fun, because you're like putting it all together. This is what I've done, and like, wow, I've done something really cool, and I'm about to do
right.
so much more after that. And I think the only final word besides that, this isn't advice, but it's possible. It is 100% possible for a polytechnic student to go to a US college.
Right, and you are
um
living proof of that. Mm,
yeah, and I
yeah,
have a few friends. It's a handful, but it
yeah,
absolutely
mm,
is possible. There is no reason we should not be able to. There's no reason we should be disadvantaged. It's there, and it is a great opportunity. And if given the chance to do it, you should apply. It is a really, really incredible opportunity for yourselves. That is not impossible at all. Yeah,
mm. And statistically, the percentage of poly students going to uni might be lower than from JC, but it's also one important factor to note is that a lot of poly students aren't thinking of applying to uni or applying to US unis, right?
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause so there's this information asymmetry kind of. Okay, Chris, thank you so much for coming today. Really enjoyed your insights and our conversation. Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for having me.